Hello and welcome to another SOULution Sunday, where the soul is the SOULution. I'm Lisa Warner. I'm the author of The Simplicity of Self-Healing, and today I am here with Matty Lansdown. Matty is the creator of a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die. He is also a scientist, and he's been in the medical field, and we're going to get the whole lowdown from him as we go. So I'm super excited because this is a topic right up my alley. Matty, welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
You're welcome. I love the name of your podcast. I'm super jealous that I didn't think of it first.
Yeah, it's a funny one, and I love that it makes everybody laugh.
Exactly. So how did you end up coming up with a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die?
Yeah, that's a big question, I guess. Because that was the first step for me into this, being a really active member of this world of natural health and healing and, preaching the good words, so to speak. And so I guess, my background is as a scientist in a medical setting, in a hospital, particularly in a cancer hospital. And I started there in my early 20s, so young, naive, excited to just have a job and get paid, that type of thing. Early on, I was just really confused by a lot of the stuff we were doing. And I wasn't raised by, hippie parents or spiritual parents or anything energetic parents in any way. My mum was a nurse. She helped lecture medical students. I used to go to the hospital with my mum as daycare. Like I lived in a small town. So the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I was literally just running around the ward at the hospital as daycare. So all of that to say that I just developed this really positive relationship with science and medicine and the hospital. And I really thought it was, the absolute pinnacle of human intelligence, until I worked in one, basically. So I had a really, medicalized upbringing. Having said that, interestingly, once I sort of went on this path, I realized that mum actually did take us to chiropractors and naturopaths and stuff when we were much younger, but it was kind of confusing because it was like, well, if mum works in this industry, why do we do this? Anyway, I was confronted with that same challenge on my journey, which is working in the hospital. And I was just confused why nobody dealt with the cause of the disease. And so my base degree is in forensics. So a lot of the work that I've done over the years is around death. And so looking at all the death data and different bits of information and mortality meetings and morbidity meetings that I was in every single week, just trying to understand why nobody ever once in the history of this patient's health, because that's what we would do, we would analyze this stuff together, why nobody asked about the cause of the disease, ever. It seems super bizarre. And me in my early 20s naively is just like, oh, obviously that's just not an important part of the conversation, because obviously we would do that if it was. I'd been there about 6 months of what ended up being about 7 years. And I thought, all right, I've really got to get into this cancer thing and learn about it and, become good at it. And so I started literally at the World Health Organization website. And the first sentence on the cancer page at the time actually said 90 to 95% of cancers are diet, lifestyle, and tobacco. And that only 5 to 7% are genetic. And so if you ask anybody on the street, you say the big C word, which was actually ranked the most scary word in the English language, they think you've just had bad luck. They just think you've had bad luck, which means bad genes. And actually, the extreme vast majority is down to diet and lifestyle choices. And I went to my professor and just said, hey, so why don't we do diet and lifestyle? It seems like that would make sense. And he laughed, and he's a genius, one of the smartest humans I've ever met. And I've worked with so many phenomenal humans that just don't get the simplicity of that question. He laughed and just said, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out a long time ago. And so me just finding this disconnect, and also knowing everybody in the hospital I worked in, all the labs, no one was working on a cure. Nobody works on cures. It's not a thing, because you don't get money from healthy people. So everyone, including the lab I was in, it's about drug and disease management over time. How long can you keep somebody alive for in order for them to be able to perpetually use drugs? So pharmaceutical companies get paid. Now, I don't think capitalism is a bad thing. I just think the way the system has been built currently is not in favor of healthy humans. And so sort of fast forward a few years, I go down the rabbit hole of the Rockefeller family and the pharmaceutical industry and the rail industry and the oil industry, and like all the roots of that are just deep and dark and terrifying. But that's the sort of foundations that Western medicine is built upon. And when you talk about this stuff in 2022, people kind of think you're a conspiracy theorist because it's actually been 150 years since this was put in motion. So they think, oh, I've got a doctor, I've met nurses, I've met all these people, and they seem lovely. And everybody I've ever worked with is lovely, and they are in the industry for the right reasons. But it's so deep down the rabbit hole that nobody's taught. Like when you go to medical school, you're not taught Western medical history. And I'm sure if you were, it would probably be the wrong version. Like not all the deep, dark, capitalist, tyrannical parts of Western medicine. And so this all led me to get really angry, basically. So I also had a partner in my 20s that was going through some serious health challenges, and I saw her have 9 surgeries and medications that made her worse and worse and worse. So simultaneously, I was going on this journey myself, just with my head, like information, and being like, this doesn't make sense. And then watching her and sort of go, eventually get off Western medicine and drugs and be the healthiest she's ever been. And so these two parallels were sort of like, well, this is what I'm thinking. Here's the evidence for it at home. And that led me to just being, super angry that we were all being misled and lied to. And so I was like, it's so easy to not get sick and die. Like it's actually pretty easy. But in the modern day, like people think, oh, about the age of 45, 50, I just have to put my hand in the potluck drawer of which disease I'll get for the next 30 years. And that's not how humans are meant to live. So that all led to the podcast being created and me wanting to put out a message of just how simple it is to get back to not being sick and dying, and dying in your sleep naturally of old age is really like the old norm.
Exactly. Wow. I love that story. That's amazing. And it really, truly is simple. When I found myself facing cancer, like chemo and radiation and, heavy duty pharmaceuticals, that did not seem simple to me.
No.
And it seemed really, really scary, as a matter of fact. And I was like, healing should not be scary. Like, there's got to be a better way than this. And, at that time, I was so far down in the deep, dark depression of my life that I really, truly didn't care whether I lived or died at that point. So I was like, what the hell? I'll figure it out myself, or I won't. Either way, it's a win-win for me, right?
Yeah, totally.
So all of a sudden, once I suddenly, I meditated and I started to just ask, what do I need to know about this? And suddenly it became completely obvious to me that I wasn't being attacked by cancer, that's like the marketing message that they're sending to everybody to get them to go that medical route. And suddenly I realized my body is functioning exactly the way it's designed to function, given the circumstances that I've provided for it. And in that moment, I went, oh my gosh, we're all being lied to. We're all being misled about cancer. And
yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So I love that you went down the study and studying the rabbit hole of the Rockefeller Foundation and all of that, because most people aren't putting the pieces of the puzzle together to see who is actually behind the system that has.
I think in the last 2 years, particularly, it's been very evident that humans don't remember. Like and I think we would all basically be angels that hover around the earth if humans remembered just for 5 generations. We don't even remember. Like, we would be so energetically and spiritually evolved if humans just remembered, and I remember one of my clients, she has a PhD in history, and she said that she was talking to her professor at some point in the pandemic, and he said, if there's anything that I've learned from studying history for 45 years, it's that nobody remembers history. And that's like the biggest problem.
Yeah, and the history that we're told is kind of not exactly the history that is actually real on the planet.
I've got a really good quote for that. And my dad's really into sort of the other side of history. And he said to me that the version of history you're taught is the version taught by those that won.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that just blew my mind when I was like, oh my God. Yeah, of course it is.
Right? Exactly. So, people just think that when we go to school, we just learn the truth about everything and that life is the way it is. But life is only the way it is because we think it's that way. And
totally.
When we start to see that it's actually doesn't have to be this way at all, then we can start changing our consciousness and start remembering who we actually are, the angels that have come to animate these physical bodies and have a physical experience. We're the soul.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other thing I would say is, like, as a kind of a caveat, is that like Western medicine has certainly saved my life. So I think the problem is that we apply emergency medical thinking, which is like a pill for an ill, to chronic long-term things that took years and decades to develop, and then will take years and decades for so many people, if ever, for them to go away. And so I think, I would definitely be dead without Western medicine. So it's got its place. And the other thing is too, we're in such an unnaturally toxic world. Sometimes it takes toxic drugs to kill the toxic problem to get back on your feet. But at that point, you should then move into health, nutrition, lifestyle, relationships, meditation. But the system doesn't do that. It just says, hey, keep taking this devastating medication.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the Western emergency medicine is amazing. If your bowels burst or your appendix bursts or in a catastrophic car accident or something, you definitely want a surgeon around. And totally. They're great. It's amazing. But when it comes to actually healing people from cancers and other diseases, not so much.
Yeah. Well, and I think the massive utility that it has is diagnosis, because like the tools, the phenomenally amazing scientific tools that we have to find information, because a lot of natural health practitioners, whether you use meditation, whether you use naturopathy, whether you use Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, like the diagnosis, we usually go to a Western medical doctor, get all the science data, and then go and give it to the natural health practitioner. So I think it's got huge utility in investigate as an investigative tool to understand what is wrong in a material sense with the body, so that then we can go and use other tools that are at our disposal.
Well, what I've really come to understand is that the mind and the body are inextricably linked. And, when we are in fear or doubt or worry or anxiety, our bodies are responding to that. And they respond in very specific ways. And, our consciousness is generating our reality. So when we go to the doctor and we're afraid of diseases, and we get a diagnosis of a scary disease, all of a sudden that forms our consciousness into a specific pattern. Oh no, I have 6 months to live, or whatever they tell us. And now it's so locked in. There's so much charge around that scary diagnosis that we don't know how to unlock our consciousness from that. We don't know how to clear that pattern out and override that. So we end up living out that very pattern that they gave to us.
Yeah, I think as well, like one of the problems, which probably stems from, maybe my grandmother's era, it's that everybody like sees the doctor as, like society has positioned them socially as this prestigious know-it-all kind of, deity. And that's where we're learning, thanks to the internet, like that's not always true. And they're taught one particular version of the body. But to come back to sort of what you're saying about being given a prognosis or a diagnosis or an expectation, is that we disproportionately put so much weight on the information that type of individual gives to us. And so I think that's backed by the fact that Western medicine also tells us, or Western culture, not even just medicine, but it convinces us that if you're not an expert in the university system that we've devised means that you're an expert, you're not smart enough to make a call on that particular thing, even if it's your own body. And so you go to a doctor who's meant to be an expert in bodies, and you are not an expert in bodies. You have a body, but you're not an expert in one, apparently. And so you go to the doctor and you're like, oh, because he studied for a long time or she studied for a long time. And so the weight that diagnosis comes with is essentially a death sentence, because you give so much credibility to the words that person's delivered to you that you literally write your own death certificate in your mind, and you commit to the path of like, well, in 6 months, my energetic self will just surrender to death. And it's, I think, yeah, we're starting to learn that, yeah, there's lots of different ways to have the conversation, and that can be a guess. We all know people that, like your story, right? Where people have been given a particular time frame, or people have been told this is how long it's going to take, and then 30 years later they're still kicking on, and it's not, there's plenty of evidence for that not to be the case. But I think we've got to take doctors off their pedestal and make them human again.
Precisely. And when I healed myself, I had these awarenesses about what was going on with my body. And the only way that I could have those awarenesses was because I didn't go that medical route. So my consciousness wasn't immersed in this is the way it is. So I opened up to other possibilities. And, when we open up to other possibilities, we find out that, there are universal laws about like how the universe works, and there's biological laws about how our bodies work. But we're going by medical law, and it's completely different. We're really pharmaceutical law, and pharmaceutical law is completely different than natural law.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it becomes more and more, about economic law.
Exactly.
As opposed to healing or helping or anything like that.
Yeah, and because of this big push to pad the pockets of these people, they don't really care whether we live or die. They just want to get the money out of it. So, as we start to go on this spiritual journey, we start to open our consciousness, and we start to become aware of more of what's going on this planet. We start to realize that we haven't been told the truth, as humanity for a very, very long time, which is why we all have this state of amnesia. We don't remember who we are. And, so it just goes to reason that the doctors have also been lied to about how our bodies work. So if they've been lied to about how our bodies work, then we're just following that lead, and it's going in the wrong direction. They haven't been taught about our body's natural ability to heal itself. And they haven't been taught about the cause. How did this happen? We see when our bodies, when we fall and break our arm, like we know the trauma that happens, like it's completely obvious. But when it comes to emotional trauma, that shows up on the inside of our bodies. That's what is triggering the diseases, quote unquote. So, and this is, it's fully thoroughly researched biological law, but we've never been taught that, and the doctors haven't been taught that either.
Yeah, no, you're so right. And I think as well, like we forget that, I guess, like dictators, well, not necessarily dictators, but dictators, leaders, emperors, kings, queens, for all of history have used strategy through essentially mind control, but, you know, putting a message out there in order to keep a massive group of people compliant to whoever's trying to regulate them. And, you know, it's like the way that I try and humanize, I guess, these people that have lied to us is to think, okay, and let's use someone that's alive that's a part of this, right? Like, let's say Bill Gates, right? And I look at Bill Gates and I think he's a white dude. I'm a white dude. He's a man. I'm a man. If I went through his life and had his resources, would I have made the same decisions? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important because a lot of people sort of, you know, if we look at the typical hierarchy of society, a lot of the people down here with me are righteously being like, I would never be evil or I would never hurt anyone. And I actually think that that's highly unlikely that you wouldn't do that, because if you were, yeah, in that position of power, control, wealth, life experience, you're a human, you have a human brain, and just as we've discussed, very few humans have learnt from history, so it's very likely you would repeat the mistakes of thousands of generations of humans before you. So that's kind of the way that I reconcile the tyranny of the world, is to see that it's possible that I would make the same decisions.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And if you've been indoctrinated into that mindset from early on, you know, hurt people, you know.
Yep.
So we have to kind of step back and look and see, you know, what actually happened to them when they were children. You know,
Yeah.
how did they develop into this person that they currently are, that really doesn't care about humanity, or so it seems.
Yeah, well, and I think that's interesting too, like, so it seems, because I think sometimes we're just so removed that their point of view as to what is helping humanity is just so incredibly different. They're like, oh no, we're doing this because depopulation is necessary for, you know, like the farming of the world to continue, because there was a report, you know, a few years ago that said there's only 60 harvests in the soil because of our extremely damaging farming practices. And so maybe that's the way they're thinking. I don't agree, but maybe there's a way that they're rationalizing decisions of keeping people ill and compliant. And I guess, to go back to trying to make sense of it all, if I was a king or a queen or, you know, at the head of anything, and there was like 7.8 billion people that disagreed with me, that would be a pretty vulnerable position. So I'd probably want to put out a message that meant that they didn't want to kill me.
Exactly. Kill them first before they kill you.
So yeah.
So now you're also a nutritionist. You do a lot with that, with people. Tell us about that part of your life.
Yeah, sure. So I guess along that journey, I was like everybody else, probably in the Western world, or if not the whole world nowadays. But the idea that nutrition and the health of the body were the same thing was like laughable to me. And I guess I grew up as a bit of an athlete as well. So I really only coupled good nutrition with athletes. And then I lived with some strength and conditioning coaches when I was at university. And I really started to see the connection between food and their bodies, because they looked photoshopped all the time. They were just so incredibly in shape. And we had athletes around our house all the time. And so that was when I really began to be like, oh, there's some kind of connection, but disease, as if chocolate causes cancer, you know, or as if this causes that. And most people, I would say the masses, still think like that. And so I went on this journey of realizing that in the hospital setting, every time I would walk through clinic, like everybody in the hospital was notably obese. Like, not everybody, some people like underweight that have been through a lot of chemo. So the chemo's like robbed them of all their body's energy and stuff like that. But most people, the very vast majority, are significantly like visually overweight. And so I thought, I just kind of was, thinking naively, as like, oh, maybe being overweight's a problem, because we know obesity causes, is a contributor to cancer and Alzheimer's and insert your disease. And it's basically the number one precursor to any of the diseases that you can sign yourself up for, essentially. And so I just started thinking like, oh, all right, maybe I need to help people lose weight. Then they won't get the next problem, which is the cancer in this particular setting. And so I started, learning about nutrition, and also my partner throughout my 20s. Nutrition had such a positive impact on her health and the way that she was able to function on a daily basis. And so through her journey, I myself was beginning to get healthier and healthier. And also, although all of the Lansdown men in my family don't really gain weight, which is great, it doesn't mean we don't eat horrifically, and that all of them have had surgery on some part of their gastrointestinal tract because of the crap that they put in. And so I was actually in that situation too. I lived, a pretty terrible diet in the early part of my life. And it was to the point where I was going to the toilet. There was blood every single time for years. And I was like, food's not related to this. This is just bad luck, which is what most people think about their health situation. And it was, my partner in my 20s that was like, oh, that could be cancer, or that could be because you're eating terribly. And so I just started learning about gluten and bread and all these things. And this is also simultaneously happening at the early few years in the hospital, where I'm asking all these questions. And I just started to change my nutrition, and I basically solved a multiple year problem in about 4 weeks by just removing grains. And I was like, this is amazing. It works. And so I started looking into food as medicine and learning about, because I was learning about the history of cancer. And on that journey, I learned about traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Australian Aboriginal medicine, which is like the oldest. It's like 40,000 years of history of that. And so it's like, I just really understood, like, of course this works, because every cell in our body and every molecule that is in our body exists because of the fuel that we put into it. So if you are eating terribly, you're building a body that is terrible. That's just as simple as it is. And it's kind of, an overused cliche term, but you are what you eat, literally. Like, so if you eat lots of fast food and lots of manufactured food, then your body is going to be made essentially as a house of cards, because those foods are not designed appropriately and don't have adequate nutrition. And so, I just went down that rabbit hole, and then became so passionate learning about all these people that had healed themselves by just changing their diet. Not even the lifestyle bit, not even the stress bit, and not even the sleep bit, all of which are incredibly important. And so I did the same. I just went as healthy as I could and tried all these different diets, and just watched my own sort of mental health and cognitive health and physical health really transform. And then I just was like, this is such a powerful tool. How does nobody know how to eat? Because like, we've eaten for millions of years, but again, humans forget so easy, right? So I just went down this path and got really passionate. And I realized that once I started, was doing lectures and seminars and events on nutrition. I actually realized I never spoke to anybody that didn't know that meat and vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds were a good idea. So I was like, hang on, if everybody knows what to eat, why are they not doing it? And so I thought I'd, found the secret sauce in the nutrition world. It's like, oh, actually everybody knows. Why did I do all of this study on nutrition if everybody already knows? And then I realized that it's got a lot to do with our psychology, which is where I spend a lot of my energy now, helping people with emotional eating and the stories, belief systems, and relationships that they have around food, because many of them, if not all of them, know what they should be eating. And I help people answer the question, why can't I? And sort of set up a new cognitive system to be able to actually regulate their relationship with the addictive sugar or the unhelpful foods or the convenience foods, and just build essentially a new kind of identity that exists, that is, I'm a healthy person. So it's a combination of the nutrition. Most people know what to do there, intuitively, but also most people have been convinced that their intuition is lying to them. So we've got to deal with that too. But yeah, I'm incredibly passionate about the power of food. It's a feature of every part of natural medicine in all of history. And it's because it's how the body is built from the stuff we put into it.
Exactly. And this gorgeous planet that we live on provides every single thing we need. all the foods grow straight out of the beautiful, fertile, rich soils, all the herbs, the plants that we can use for both food and medicine. And now we have been convinced that that's alternative.
Yeah.
Like,
I know, right?
when did nature become alternative?
Yeah, well, I laugh about that too with like the hospital and is normal medicine, mainstream medicine, and then 10,000-year-old Chinese medicine is alternative, or 40,000-year-old Aboriginal medicine is alternative, or 6,500-year-old Ayurvedic is, and it's like, hang on, Western medicine's only 150 years old. Like, that's alternative.
Exactly. And when we look at at least anytime that I have been around a hospital and it's mealtime and we look at what the food is that they're serving these patients, it's like Jello, like all kinds of like crazy stuff that is not particularly healthy looking. What's up with that?
Yeah, no, you're so right. I always it got to the point where I was just such a natural health advocate whilst I was still working in the hospital that the dietitians on the ward would see me coming and be like, this guy that thinks he knows about nutrition, like, because I would be so fired up. And we got to the point too where doctors would come in and be like, Matty, we've got another patient for you that's apparently cured their life or their cancer on this particular diet. And I was just like, 1 for me, 0 for you. And so like everybody started to learn this, and I started, doing the podcast, which was kind of a secret. And it was funny too, just on a little tangent here, people after meetings would come, would wait, hang around or follow me and be like, hey, so I checked out your podcast. And they'd be like really ashamed of the fact that they learned stuff, and they were shocked that they learned stuff and about, nutrition and different things. But yeah, it's interesting too, because I always say that your liver doesn't have a brain, right? And so all it interprets things as is one of two things: nutrition and a useful resource, or a toxin and something to respond to protect the body. There's no in between with a single molecule that goes through the liver, right? And so when you're in a hospital, you're taking medications and pharmaceuticals. If they're necessary or not necessary, doesn't matter. Your liver will still interpret that chemical as an unnatural toxin, and it will do its job to detox it. And if it doesn't detox it, you've got a problem, right? And so when you're in a situation with food as well, your liver will interpret the food the same way. So if you're putting toxic drug in, which might be necessary, but toxic drug in, and then also layering it up with toxic food, your liver doesn't go, oh, that's all right. We know that's a burger from McDonald's, so we're not gonna damage the body with this. It doesn't do that, right? So to me, it's like we're just layering up toxic drug, toxic environment, probably toxic relationships, and lack of sleep, because you get no sleep in a hospital. Sleep's the most important health variable, and you get none in a hospital. You're stressed by the situation, and then food, which is meant to be fueling this entire machine, we're putting more toxins into the system. And so, I think that's an awful strategy. And again, it comes down to economics, because it's the deals that the hospitals have with food companies, and how much they can get into the hospital for a particular type of fee or wage or whatever, however much it costs. And I know in a cancer setting, the main strategy is calories. The conversation is about calories, because they want to get as much energy into an individual for them to be able to survive the really hectic treatment. Now, to me, that doesn't make much sense, because if you put loads and loads of diesel into a petrol car, you're still going to blow up the engine. Doesn't matter how much fuel there is. And so volume in that context doesn't make much sense. Volume is useful if the fuel is the right fuel, right? Volume then matters. And so, it got to the point where I would be just like, what about turmeric and ginger and all of these things, where there's actually hundreds and thousands of studies, like actual scientific studies on this stuff that could be leveraged by the pharmaceutical companies. But, you can't patent a natural molecule like turmeric or ginger. So you can't own it. You can't earn commission from it. So it doesn't happen. But yeah, no, I think if anybody listening has family members in hospital, or you're in hospital yourself, find someone to bring you food that came out of the ground and didn't go through processing. Nothing in a bag, a box, or a can. And whether you're in hospital or not, avoiding bag, a box, or a can types foods, for the most part, is usually going to be beneficial to your body.
Absolutely. I'm just dumbfounded when I go to the grocery store and, I look at all the foods, quote unquote, that are available there. And the organic section is this little teeny tiny section of produce. And then all the other stuff is non-organic, or else it's packaged as microwavable, or it's, in a box. And then you look at the ingredients and you can't even pronounce the ingredients.
Yeah.
Like, what happened to actual food? Like, stuff
I think
in the box. Not
that's
really
a really good question, because there's a really uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had, right? Which a lot of people don't want to talk about, because it involves a conversation about dying. And that conversation is, how did we get here where there's foods that aren't real foods? Well, because we created an earth that has such an exceptional number of humans that we had to produce food in an unnatural way. So that begs the question, how did we end up with so many people on the planet that we couldn't feed? Like with and what I mean by that is with real food. And that's a really uncomfortable conversation, because the end of that conversation is who dies first. And unfortunately, we've created a 7.8, probably eventually 9 billion person problem. Half the world overeats, half the world undereats, and we've got this like disconnect. So there's, in the pursuit again of capital gains, people have been trying to keep as many people thriving, or not thriving, but surviving, through whatever versions of food that they can throw together. Because the reality is, organic farms produce smaller crops, smaller yields, and it is much more difficult to feed the planet on a organic model, because of the chemicals make it possible. It doesn't make it healthy. It makes it possible though. We've got to figure out, like, we created this problem, and now we've got all of these humans, because back in the day when we were in tribes and clans, it was a choice. Like, it was a choice to add a member to the community that they could feed, and make sure that they were able to look after. And if somebody died, or somebody was getting older and unable to be a warrior or a hunter, it was like, all right, so now we need to expand the community. Now, I'm not necessarily saying we should be that regimented, like we all live in China and we're only allowed to have one child. However, like, selfishly populating the earth with humans without any thought creates problems. And we are in a situation where we've got a big problem.
Yeah. Community used to be so important. Everyone was raised by the community. Children were planned, they weren't just haphazard. And, everybody contributed to raising the children. And that was just normal life. But as life became kind of not so normal anymore, with all of these, we'll just kind of say kind of the sexual energy virus that goes around, where people, instead of being in community, it has turned into like every man for himself. I've got to, and then we just have this whole society that is completely off balance, where it's not family centered anymore. It is very hedonistic, and, we're seeing, the messages all the time, the messages to the teenagers, and, you have to look like this, and you have to be like this, and be sexy, and, blah, blah. And it's causing far, far, far more damage than, we need to have on this planet.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I actually talk about that a lot in regards. So I mostly work with women because it seems like, generally speaking, women are willing to accept help. Men are pretty stubborn with their health. But the thing that I talk about a lot is that we've got the real pandemic, or one of the real pandemics, is like the situation with women's being overweight, being stressed, having all of these issues for like a good 20 or 30 years. And the reason for that in many cases is that their hormones are so shot because they've been living in this constant stress environment where they have to be everyone to the family, husband, kids, all of the time. And so their stress hormones never switch off. And when you produce hormones, there's a hierarchy. And so the cortisol and adrenaline are the most important. And when you use up all of your resources there, you can't really supply the rest of your system with your estrogen and your progesterone. And there's a whole host of others that don't get made as a result. And you do that for a couple of decades, and then you've got some serious weight loss problems that are extremely hard to reverse. And I actually think that the big thing that is at play here is just what you said, is that once upon a time, it used to be a group of women, and the kids would come to you with a problem, and you'd be like, oh no, Lisa deals with those problems. I deal with these problems for everyone. Do you know what I mean? And so everybody had their role, and your stress only happened when you dealt with your challenge. Or in a different perspective, it's that instead of 100% of stress being on you, the group shared 5% each. And it wasn't hugely impactful. And once it was over, it was over. It wasn't like, oh my God, soccer practice. Oh my God, school. Oh my God, like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so I work with these women that are like, I want to change this about my body. And I'm like, unless you are willing to create space in your life to just be, to just be calm, to breathe, to be present, we're actually not going to improve much. You might eat correctly. You might get up and go to the gym. You might do all the things. But if you're going to do all the things, you're still doing all the things. You're still running on stress. So, which again comes back to the psychology, because a lot of mums have this belief, and I'm not saying that it's an incorrect belief. I'm just saying that it's one of the challenges, is that like kids first, everyone before me. And unfortunately, what that does, if we look long term, is that you teach your kids how to show up in the world as adults. And if you are totally selfless, it's a beautiful concept and it's nice to say to each other, but actually self-care is more important than putting everybody else first. Because as a parent, because when your children are 21 or 25 and they're out on their own, consciously or unconsciously, they're going to say, how do I do life? Right? You get the odd black sheep, and I'm definitely a black sheep, but most kids will be like, they will default to the way that you showed up for yourself. That's how they'll show up for themselves. And the cycle repeats. And then then Western medicine says to us, oh, genetics run in families. Genetics are not the problem most of the time.
Exactly.
Like, it's habits, routines, cycles that they learned, like unconsciously absorbing your behaviors and the way that you show up in the world. And so I think that, getting back to that group mentality and having a group of mums and a group of, a family that's all connected and helpful and is so incredibly important to the health of females across the planet, so they can offload some of this stress or share the challenge and the burden. And men are obviously should be a part of that solution as well.
Exactly. There was a time on this planet where life itself was sacred, where everything was honored. The plants were honored. The humans were honored. The water was honored. The animals were honored. And everything was in balance. When we're living in balance with nature, then, and we're living with dignity and honor and respect for ourselves and each other and the planet, we just be healthy. We be in balance. But because those words, in my opinion, say, honor and respect, we don't have a lot of people demonstrating that, in the news. And we see people treating each other horribly and disrespecting the planet. And that's the norm on the planet at this point. So I think right now we're in this massive shift of consciousness where we're bringing back sacredness and bringing back the dignity and the honoring of the planet. And I think as we do that, our health is going to improve dramatically.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you're right. Like, yeah, we're all being led down this path strategically, in order for us, again, like where we started, to be compliant and to be not dangerous to the system, and not a threat to the system. And so I think, yeah, the more that we can do to empower people to stand in their own truth and develop and create a life that they actually benefit from a health perspective, from a energetic perspective, from an emotional perspective, then that's really doing good work. Because unless you're in the driver's seat of your own life, you're just a character in somebody else's story.
Exactly. That was really well said. I love that. Yeah, I think that, it really truly is about empowering ourselves. And the only thing that we each have full command over is our own state of being.
Mm-hmm.
And who we be and how we be is actually under our command. It is under our control. But we have been living in reaction mode to all the stresses and strains of the external world, that we lose track of that. We lose our ability to be. And I talk about, we really don't need to heal our bodies. We have to become the version of ourself that is healthy and balanced.
Yeah, and as well, for us to believe we're worthy of that. So many people have been pulverized into believing a certain group of things about themselves, and it comes along with that selflessness, that is celebrated in society. It's like, oh, look at the person that did everything for everyone else but themselves, and we really champion that in society. And I think actually that person would do far more good by showing up themselves as a great person for themselves. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson, the psychologist, famous psychologist. He often says that, until you've got a perfect home, don't criticize the world. And I think that we would change the world by everybody fixing their own home, as opposed to going out and saying, I'm not going to worry about my stuff, but I'll try and fix as many other people so that society says you're a good person.
Exactly. Until we can stand for ourselves and create our boundaries and say no to a lot of these things, to realize that we actually have the ability to stand up and make choices for ourselves without being coerced and cajoled and pushed and pulled. And it's like, we need to be able to remember who we are as these grand beings of light and love, so that we can stand in that power that is our love.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think conversations like this, podcasts like yours, are all a part of that solution, right? Just slowly drip feeding knowledge to people in a way that they get exposed over time, and hopefully that facilitates a transformation at some point. Or it might not be, a big momentous occasion. It might just be like, oh, I've just been listening to this kind of stuff for a long period of time, and I feel different. Things, I'm starting to show up in the world differently, and it's just slowly happened over time, which is probably the way most things should happen, unless, of course, something happens like a death or a diagnosis that shocks you into that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing that we have all been in this state of amnesia for so long, that we just go with the flow and do whatever we're told to do. And we don't really even think twice about it, but we don't realize that how much power we actually have to create the lives that we want to create, that we are creator beings, and that we're creating with our every thought, whether we're aware of it or not. And we've been trained literally to be unconscious, to just simply do what we're told, follow the rules, do what you're told, then you'll get a reward. Good little girl, good little boy, you get a gold star today, And we've forgotten how to think for ourselves and how to reason for ourselves and to listen to our own inner guidance. And our body is the inner guidance system. We're so conditioned to try to avoid pain at all cost. But, sometimes the body is sending us these little jabs like, ooh, that doesn't feel right. And we go, oh, well, I don't want to listen to that. But that's our soul speaking and guiding us in the right direction.
Yeah, I think just when you touched on being good little girls and boys, like that school system and the society we've got like really perpetuates a victim mentality as well. And more so than anything, the internet. Like the political correctness of everything is like always rushing to be like, don't hurt the poor victim, and it's just a narrative that, and I'm not saying people shouldn't be protected. It's just like, it's a perpetual narrative through society that, if you can claim victim status, you'll get attention, you'll generate money, you'll be in situations where you get needs met that you might not otherwise have met. And that, showing up in the world as someone that's not a victim and that is in control, you don't get those things. And you might get those things, but you've got to go about them in a different way that might feel less fulfilling to those wounds that you currently have. And so I think, showing up in the world as someone that's not a victim but is in control is a really difficult transition for a lot of people to make, because they've got to make decisions for themselves. They're responsible for the outcome. And, sometimes the devil is better than the one you don't. So it's like, even intellectually, people listen to like this conversation and think, yeah, I get it. If I showed up in the world, it would be beneficial, but I'm not going to do it because it's too scary. I don't know what's going to happen out there. It's wild.
Yeah. And, that's such the illusion too. Like when I found myself facing cancer and I was like, I'm not going the medical route, but I don't know what to do. Like, it was super, super scary.
Yeah.
But then, as I went on along the journey, and suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I created this. Somehow I created this. And if I created this, I can also uncreate it. And like, even though I didn't know how to uncreate it in the moment, I just knew that I could. And I knew that if I asked the right questions, that I would receive the right answers. And it ends up being the most empowering thing to be able to take responsibility for your own self, for your own circumstances. It becomes your salvation in the end.
Yeah. What do you think people need to experience in order to take that step into responsibility?
Well, unfortunately, most people need to experience, some catastrophic event, and get pushed into that. But I think the consciousness is starting to raise on the planet fast enough now that I think as the vibration raises, that everybody is just starting to just automatically start to wake up, and they're starting to automatically realize, wait a second, there's a different way to be on this planet. And, if I'm in control of me, if I can be in charge of me, then that's all that I need to be in charge of. I can't be in charge of you. I can't be in charge of anybody else. I can only be in charge of me. And when I take full responsibility for me, then I start living in balance, and I start commanding some respect, and I start giving other people the respect that I would like to have. And then kind of everything starts to change in your life. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, things are a whole lot easier than I thought they were. Things are actually really, really simple. Like, if I just take care of me and keep myself in balance, the world around me changes automatically. And it's spectacular.
Yeah. Oh, it's so spectacular. Yeah. And it's just like all the stories we attach to, showing up and having to struggle and being the victim are just, again, probably things we learned from how our parents showed up, or our parental figures showed up in the world. And you get, like, I don't know what it's like in your family, but I know, like, a lot of my family, you catch up and it's like, how's work? Yeah, it's all right. Like, it's like, how's the kids? Yeah, all right. Like nothing is, it's not even okay to be like, everything is amazing. Like, you're almost judged for like enjoying the experience because you're not suffering at work and the job you hate, or you're like, your marriage is actually happy. Oh my God, forbid,
Right? It's crazy.
It is.
Yeah, but what we start to find out is that the happier we are, the healthier we are. So it's
Totally.
definitely pays to start taking our happiness into our own hands and start to realize that we actually have control over that.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And as you said that, it reminded me of when I went to laughter yoga. Have you ever done laughter yoga?
I have not, but I have heard about it.
Yeah, it's a hilariously awkward experience, but worthwhile.
Well, we definitely need more laughter in the world. And if we all just turned off the news, we would certainly make great strides in that.
Oh, totally. I don't have any social media apps on my phone, and like, it's heaven. It's so good.
Nice, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I just can't do it anymore. Like, they're just so consuming and distracting. And sure, every now and then I'm like, oh, should I download it? But it's just, it's so all encompassing unnecessarily.
Exactly. Most people think that the news is the way it is because the world is the way it is. But I completely disagree. I think the world is the way it is because the news is constantly spewing fear and craziness into the world. And I was thinking about it the other day. It's like, what if there was no news? Or what if the news was actually good news instead of bad news? And I started to realize, wow, that one change in the world would completely change the world.
It really would. Even if, as you said that, it reminded me of an assignment that I did in my nutrition degree, where we had to do one side of the argument, and then the second assignment was like rebutting everything that you had said. And I think that's genius. All degrees should be made up of that. But two is that with the news, even if it wasn't just good news, but it was 50% bad, 50% good, to just show the dichotomy of reality, or the duality of reality. Because we're never going to eliminate, horrificness and terribleness. But, I believe, and it's like, I don't really have any proof, but like, I like the concept as a scientist that there's always equal parts good and bad at all times. And it's just where you focus your attention. So yeah, even just adding 50% of the good stuff to the news, I think would transform the world.
Exactly. So here we are, transforming the world, one podcast at a time.
We're giving it a go.
Exactly. Wow, Matty, this has been such a great conversation. I love our conversations.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for getting me on, and thanks for being on my show too. So I know when that gets released, everyone's going to love it.
I'm sure it'll be great. So let everybody know, how do they find you?
Yeah, sure. So any and all podcast apps, you can find How to Not Get Sick and Die. So check out Lisa's episode. It's amazing. And other than that, I've got a Facebook group called the Busy Mums Collective for mothers and women out there wanting to get healthy, talk about emotional eating and nutrition. And where else? Oh, my website, mattylansdown.com.
Beautiful. So if you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Connecting You to You Radio, just check the show notes and the links will be in there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Matty, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation too.
Beautiful. So everyone, have a great week, and we will see you again on SOULution Sunday next week. Bye for now.
Bye.